let me tell you about my island factory. I am a long-time Factorio player, and I reached the point finally where I tried one of the fabled mods of Factorio, which is C-Block. And that's what you're seeing now. This is my abiding memory of when I first learned about C-Block, was whenever someone posted a picture of their base, their C-Block base, there was always this, and I could never figure out what it was from these like low-res screenshots because I had never played it, but it's the forest of your wind turbines that you get to start the game. But anyway, yeah, Factorio is a game where you play as a movable ecological disaster. You crash land on this planet and then like ravage its ecology. It's a lot of fun, but usually you're digging up stuff out of the ground. There's big patches of resources that you're building miners on top of, and that's the main way you're getting the raw resources that start your production chains. But in C-Block you do not get that. In C-Block everything comes from the water, and when you start, everything comes from having a few wind turbines and using them to power electrolyzers to electrolyze dirty water, which makes slag. And slag you can do some other things to and make it into raw resources that you can actually start doing things to. So yeah, I'm just going to do a little factory tour. I've done a couple of these. They're on my old YouTube channel, not on my new one, but whatever. Just walk through this factory. It's changed quite a bit since it started. I've torn some stuff up. But I think I've stalled out on the save. I don't think I'm going to push further. This is further than I've ever gotten on C-Block before, though. This is, I think, my third or fourth real try at it. I don't know how many hours I've put into this. C-Block is kind of something you can leave running for a long time, but I think I've done, yeah, probably more than 200 hours on this save, including leaving it running overnight and leaving it running while I'm at work and things like that. But I think I've stalled out. I might continue this save, I might not. But yeah, everything in C-Block is just way more complicated and slower and bigger than everything in normal Factorio. So this was roughly where I started. My tiny starting rock that you cling to at the beginning of C-Block was somewhere in this general area, and then I built some wind turbines and built some electrolyzers. You know, nothing is in its original state here, so these electrolyzers have been upgraded and there's more of them than before, but this is the site, this is the place where I first turned water into slag, and then turned slag into crushed stone, and then turned crushed stone. I turn on the icons here. You can see so many recipes in this mode. It's normal Factorio can be hard to read for some people. This mode is just like, it's impossible. So yeah, water into slag, slag into crushed stone into a different kind of water. There are so many different kinds of water in C-Block. So many different kinds of water. But anyway, this kind of water is a kind of water that you can turn into resources, turn into ores, that you can turn into metals, that you can turn into, you know, more conveyor belts, more inserters, more power poles. You know, the factory must expand to meet the ever-expanding needs of the factory. So mostly what you're trying to do is get things that help you get more things. And in C-Block that takes so long. It just takes so long. The other thing you need to make a lot of in C-Block always is sand, because you start off, you know, if I take to the map, you can see I'm in an ocean world. All of this land here, except for these tiny little islands, is stuff that I have put down. So you're always, in the early game, trying to make more sand. Just sand, just to dump in the ocean, just reclaiming land. Just do a lot of this, you know, just make more space. There are times when you have to be very economical with it, and then times when you go nuts with it, but it's still easy to run out of. Because you always have to make more stuff. So yeah, this was where I started. Here's another early sort of sand production thing, which is, this is a chain of turning water into different kinds of water. And one of the byproducts of turning that water into different kinds of water is sand. Everything has byproducts. In regular Factorio, all the chains of production are linear. You combine ingredients, but you never have multiple products. I don't think there's anything. I guess some of the nuclear stuff kind of does, but you generally don't have byproducts from processes, whereas in this mod, which is uses like a combination of other popular Factorio mods, as well as this unique setting and a few unique tweaks, everything's got byproducts. Everything takes 3, 4, or 5 inputs, and everything produces 2, 3 things. Like here, I'm purifying water, making water into other water, like I said, what you do a lot of. So I have just plain capital W water, and I want to make pure water, but I also have to make saline water. So got to balance that. And then there might be something else that I want to happen that is also making pure water as an output, but that's the byproduct. So I need to make sure I don't make too much pure water here, because then the other thing will not be able to output its pure water, because the pure water system will be full of water and there won't be any extra space volume for it. This is what playing C-Block is all about, and that's why you do a lot of voiding. Turning something into nothing is useful in this kind of Factorio because of all these byproducts. So if there's a byproduct that you can just turn into nothing by clarifying it in a clarifying pool or burning it off in a flare stack. Do I have any flare stacks down here? I think they're up at the top. Yeah, here are some flare stacks, just burning off stuff. So this mode, one of the things that it doesn't have is it doesn't have the fact that you're an ecological disaster, because pollution just doesn't happen in this mode, which is, it's kind of a shame. Like, I get that that's not what the mod's about, and there is opposition, but it's just in the form of passive opposition. There are some of these little islands have little worms on them, and you've got to clear those off before you can build in that area. So the military aspect of the game does still exist, but there's no resistance, there's no effect outwards onto the world of your burning just so much hydrogen all the time and so many other things. But yeah, that's not what this mode is about. This mode is just about these crazy production chains, and all these byproducts and all these things. So yeah, you start with your windmills and your electrolyzers, making slag and making crushed stone from your slag and making mineralized water from that. And originally this was going to make resources. Now it's done for other things, but the first big crunch point in C-Block is always power. You start with a pretty good amount of resources, and you start with this exact number of wind turbines. How many wind turbines? 120 wind turbines. You start with exactly that many, because I have built no more since those starting ones. And that's enough to power a few electrolyzers, and then you're out of power. So you're limited on how much more stuff you can make by how many electrolyzers you can power in the early game. So here is my early game power, which has again been very expanded since it started. But you make algae using a third kind of water, an eighth kind of water. Whoops. But you also need carbon dioxide. So not only do these production chains have branches, they have loops. Because to make carbon dioxide, I need to burn charcoal. And to make charcoal, I need to take this green algae and turn it into cellulose, and turn the cellulose into wood pellets, and turn the wood pellets into wood bricks, and then turn the wood bricks into charcoal. And then I can feed some of that back into the process to make the carbon dioxide that I need to grow the algae, but the rest of it actually is going to come out and be used for other things, and initially used for burning. Now, instead of just burning it immediately to make power, to make steam, to power these turbines, to make more power, I'm using some of that hydrogen to burn in a different way. I'm not just burning it in a flare stack. So I'm trying to, you know, find creative ways to use up your byproducts as part of this game. And here I'm turning this charcoal and this excess hydrogen into better fuel for my boilers. So yeah, this was my early power, and I've expanded that a couple times here. You can see each of these little sets of 6 into 4 into one of these is just a little set. So this has been with me a long time. The outline of this charcoal build, it's also survived a long time. And then I can't remember if it was at this point or later, but I did add a second stack of electrolyzers here just to make way more slag early on. You know, I think I've got a good understanding of this mode now. I definitely feel like, even though I do still have to leave it running overnight and stuff like that, I don't get stuck in the early game in the same way that I did when I first started playing this mod. And I got, you know, well into the mid game, I'd say, this time, and I feel pretty good about that. And there's a point later on that I'll show you, to sort of the point where I felt like I was doing markedly better than I ever had before. But yeah, instead of mostly using this slag to make crushed stone, we transition away from that as you progress in the tech tree into using sulfuric acid to turn it into slurry. There's tons of different kinds of waters, but there's also quite a few slurries. There's also quite a few wastewater categories. Lots of liquids. There's like 6 or 7 liquids in vanilla Factorio, something like that. There's so many in this. There's gases too, of course. So with slag slurry, you can make mineral sludge. These things, you just don't think about these names when you play this game for so long, but they're very silly. You'll see lots of little places like this where just like, oh, here's a little place where I'm on the side making some cheeky sand out of some cheeky byproducts there. But yeah, this is then the main way that you make resources in this game is by using mineral sludge, which you can then crystallize in these things into these ores. These are the things that if you were playing a less weird mod of this game, you'd just be digging up out of the ground. But no, I have to crystallize them. This again is some later stuff. So, man, I guess I ripped up the whole original thing, huh? So that was the very, very skeleton, the outline of my early game base is here. My early mid game base is just sort of gone. It's given way. Maybe these filters were here. You know, some of these things are in places where they originally were, but there was a lot of stuff here that isn't here anymore. This is my sort of early, what I would call my early mid game build. Right, this is a better way to get slurry, the good slurry that you need, than using electrolyzers to make slag. Is to do a different thing to a different kind of water. This takes 2 waters and produces geodes. So the right kind of water plus normal water gives you geodes. Doesn't just give you like a fixed number of geodes either, because that would be too easy. So if you look at the products drop down there, you can see that it has a chance to produce different kinds of geodes. I guess it always gives you a yellow one. I didn't notice that before. You get a yellow one every time. But sometimes you get 2 blue ones. Sometimes you get 2 red ones. So actually you end up getting more blue and red ones than you do yellow ones. Anyway, it's ridiculous. But you can take these and you can crush them up. Crushing things up is great. And get crystal dust, which is not a drug. It's a thing you can turn into slurry. You use acid, you make it into slurry, and then that slurry can become a different slurry, and you use that different slurry to make resources. It's all about the slurry. What am I even doing with this slurry now? It's going somewhere else. Oh, it's going down here. Yeah, see, we get mineral sludge out of this slurry. We turn water into rocks, water into geodes, geodes into crystal dust, crystal dust into crystal slurry, slurry into sludge, and then sludge into resources. That's the early mid-game resource loop. Man, it's hilarious. Other things that I've put in here that have come later, you could see I make some cheeky explosives here. You need sulfuric acid to make all of this, and this whole process produces, as a byproduct later on in the chain, you get sulfuric wastewater when you're making your slurry, your mineral sludge as a byproduct, and you can process that wastewater, get sulfur back, and you process that sulfur using oxygen that's overrun from your electrolyzers that you had before, and then with that you can make sulfuric acid, and actually you can make more sulfuric acid than you need to do the melting bit to make the sludge that you turn into slurry, or the slurry that you turn into sludge, or whatever. So this whole chain, like, you need a little bit of sulfur to get it started, but once you get it started, you then need to worry about having too much sulfur, too much wastewater. This is all water treatment, wastewater processing over here. So here is where I'm turning all of that sludge, all of the sludge. So I've redirected the sludge from my early game base here, and my early mid game base also sends sludge here, and I'm making raw ore out of the sludge, and then crushed ore, and also some stone out of that, and then I'm taking it down here and I'm putting into flotation tanks to make it into a different kind of thing, and then I can actually turn it into things that are, you might recognize, that aren't fictional materials that have been made up by this game. Then you could get iron ore and copper ore. This is there's different ways that you can turn these kind of ores, your sapphirites and your jivalites and your rubyites, into these recognizable ores, your copper and your iron and things like that. And at different points in the game, you want to use different transitions between this stuff and this stuff. And so I'm using one particular way of doing it here that involves using catalysts that you make from more sludge or from slurry to produce ore in a particular way, where you're producing just one ore, but most ways of making ore have byproducts, like most things. And then even getting that ore into metal isn't straightforward, because you quickly start to gain technologies that let you get a little bit more out of your ore by doing things to it first. And you have to go from ore to ingots, and ingots to plates, and then plates you can actually use, except because I built this in the mid game, I guess I had some of I don't know, mid game, early mid game kind of meaningless, but I had now you are able to add, as you get more technology, insert new parts into production chains that already exist in order to get more out of them. That's a big theme in this game. So when you start, you don't even have iron ore. You're putting this stuff straight into a furnace and getting a tiny bit of iron out of it. But then you have the ability to eventually make it into iron ore, and you can put that into a furnace and get some iron out of it. Or you can add a step, and you can turn it first into processed iron, and then turn it into iron ingots, and then turn the iron ingots into liquid iron, and turn the liquid iron into iron sheets. And then you can turn the iron sheets into iron plates. And if you add all those steps in the middle of just taking that original thing that we made over here, right, if instead of just putting that into a furnace and making iron, we do all these other steps that I ran through on the way here, we can get the same thing, but we can get more of it. We can get more iron than we would have otherwise, and so it's worth doing all of this because you're so desperate for resources in this mode. So this is my big production facility. This is sort of what I felt good about with this save, that I don't think I ever really got to this point in a good way. Or I guess, what's another way to put it? The challenge that I found with this mode in a big way is because there are these so many options for how you can do your production, because you have all these bits that you can insert in the middle that will change the ratio of inputs to outputs, but also might add new byproducts, might consume more power, certainly, just complicated. So yeah, the difficulty that I've had is in picking a good target, right? When I'm trying to think about going from my very starting base and what am I going to build next after this? What's the next step that I want to try and go for? I think in previous attempts I've gotten very stuck, like getting halfway through that and then trying to change my original plan or not anticipating correctly how much space things are going to take up. And it's all very tricky. And, you know, this base is not nicely laid out at all. Part of that's because there's stuff that I took away, but this is how you have to play this mode. You can't try and be, I don't know, maybe there are people who try and be organized and orderly, but you have to embrace the spaghetti. There's some good spaghetti later. I don't think there's any other way to play. Anyway, all of which is to say, I think I picked a good target this time. I think I had a good idea in mind of what kind of base I could transition away from that first base to. And it's this horrible thing. It's this horrible thing here. It's this really ugly thing here. Which looks nothing like any of my bases from any of my other Factorio videos. There's weird bits in the middle here. I'm making gems. I've got a chest full of gems here. I thought these might be useful at some point. I haven't gotten to anything that uses them yet, but I thought I might need some at some point. So I made those. What am I making with all this stuff? Once I actually have it. I'm trying to make research, just the same as you do in normal Factorio. You're trying to make beakers. The beakers have very clever names in this mod. They all have something in the name, or a lot of them do, that suggest the fact that they're going to be used up, right? Like there's a burns out bioprocessor, single use, you know, things like that, sacrificial, clever names. Anyway, this is what you need to feed, and obviously the rate that you can produce these at is so slow. One essential part of playing this mode is having a mod that lets you do planning. I'm not going to go into it in any detail, but that's what this whole business here is me planning out different productions or just trying to figure stuff out. And yeah, when you do that, you find that in order to produce the kind of rates of beakers production that you're used to from the normal mode of the game, you just need outrageous amounts of resources. So only ever have had, you know, 2 factories producing beakers this whole time. And I started out obviously with the colors stay the same at first. You start with red and green science, and then you have the bioscience, which has a whole fucking Jesus Christ, a whole thing going on with it. And then you get to blue science, and that's as far as I've gotten in this game. Where I'm stalling out is in trying to make the jump to the next color of science. And I think once again I've maybe like mispitched the step that I've tried to take from this base to the next base. And maybe that's where I've kind of burned out a little bit on this game. I also eventually did come back and do weapon science here. That was after I'd done all the blue science, and that has mad side products in making it, which is crazy. But also you can see even just making the beakers involves way more steps and way more spaghetti. This whole thing, as in the base game, the blue one requires that you have some like oil processing going on, and that's a whole thing in this mode because there's no oil out of the ground. You have to get oil from water because everything has to come from water. So that's a whole thing. Here's circuits. This particular spaghetti, it's just like, I mean, it's not, in my head I know where the different sectors are, but they all are just smushed in amongst them all. So yeah, there's like science up here, and then we've got like my original circuit build here that was for the science, but then there's another circuit build down here, and this circuit build is for the robots. I got to robots this time. I don't think I've ever gotten to robots. Some people play this mode with like early game robot mods. I don't know why, but that's never been a thing that I've wanted to do in Factorio. I like the building by hand, I guess. But yeah, I got to robots, and they've been kind of useful. It hasn't, revolutionized things, but I was glad to get there. It takes a lot of resources to make them, obviously, way more than in the base game. So yeah, this is my robots and roboports factory. Roboports, so expensive. And some of it's been turned off. I have a ton of batteries that I made extra early on in the game that I still haven't used up all of. What else is there around here? So yeah, these circuits from here end up being fed, if they're not being used for robots, into the other parts of my factory where I'm actually producing a lot of buildings. This is the major thing that I was like, I'm so glad that I managed to do this part, because this has eluded me before. Not just this specific bit, this is a subspace of that, but I'm producing all the inserters and belt I need here. Producing it pretty slowly, but producing enough of it that, if I leave the game on overnight, I can do big builds. So it's cool to have that, but much better than that is this whole column of stuff here. A bit more orderly here. You can see the belts are all over the place, and I had to redo some of these belts because some of these recipes changed in a patch midway through when I was on this base, which was a whole thing also. But yeah, I'm making so many buildings here. I wanted to get to the stage where I could make lots of buildings so that I could then build on a very big scale to try and get into the late game. You need, the resource requirements to keep advancing in the technology levels just get higher and higher. So in the late game, you just need huge builds, colossal builds. And you'll see, you probably saw on the map earlier, but the later stuff that I've made gets so much bigger than this and has to. So I wanted to be able to mass produce, the sort of facilities. In the base game, you do have, there's what am I trying to say? Furnaces and assemblers have different tiers. There's 3 tiers of assembler, and there's 3 tiers of furnace. And generally, the higher tiers are more expensive to make, but are better in some way for your production needs than the lower ones. In this, everything has tiers, right? Everything has tiers and more tiers. There are more tiers of belt, more tiers of inserters than there are in the base game. And then every single one of these buildings almost that you can have in these big long production chains that you're taking to make water into other things and into rocks eventually, and then into the materials that you are used to using in your factory, like metal plates. Every single step of that has a building that you can probably get an upgraded version of at some point. And sometimes the upgraded versions have access to recipes that the lower ones don't. So if you want to be taking advantage of these branching, these insertions into the production chains to increase your productivity, you need to have the higher level production facilities. So you try and build this, or at least if you're me, you do. The inserter shenanigans are hilarious to me in this mod. I also love that a lot. But yeah, this is my big production facility. Some parts of it you can see I did miss. I was like, I'm going to be able to produce the 3rd tier of this. I'm not. I'm only able to produce the 2nd tier of this. But generally, I made this 3 wide because I'm able to produce the 3rd tier of a lot of things. Here are tier 3 hydro plants, and tier 3 leaching plants, and tier 3 electrolyzers. We saw some electrolyzers before. Tier 3 advanced gas refineries. Tier 3 algae farms. Going to need a lot of those. And then there's, I'm making farms down here. I'm making regular gas refineries, and there's some stuff down here that I'm only making a little bit of. It doesn't have tiers, like a lot of this bioprocessing stuff, which, that's that part of this game. Oh man, it's something else. We'll probably go there now. I think we'll go there now, actually. I think we will, because I think that's the next part of this. Along the bottom here, just so much chaos. What is there down here? There's wood production from trees, I guess. So this is where I'm making all the extra things that you need to feed into the side. You mostly use metals to do most bits of most stuff, but you also need some other things. You need some wood to make resin, to make boards. You need bricks of various sorts. Here's a bunch of brick factories down here. Here I'm using electrolyzers just to make slag, to make rocks, to make bricks. I'm making soil here so that I can grow trees, to make wood, to make boards. Everything has so many steps. What am I doing over here? I think I'm making chlorine gas and salt over here. Yeah, I'm making salt. This is a little plant to make salt water and to make hydrochloric acid. How do you do that? Well, you use water. You make water into purified water and salt water, which I talked about before, and then this time you need the salt water, not the purified water. You can turn that into salt, chlorine, hydrogen, and then you can do other stuff with it. Here's what you have to do for oil. It's another kind of algae. There isn't just one kind of algae. There's 4 kinds of algae. Maybe there's more later on. I've only used 4 so far. And they all have different purposes. Some of them have multiple purposes. The green stuff up here, which is the same as what I was growing earlier. You use to make cellulose, to make chips, to make bricks, to make charcoal. Still need that later on. Here's another charcoal factory. This isn't for power. This is just because I need lots of charcoal. Some of the charcoal you need to make carbon, because you need carbon for things. Something I forgot to mention that is another just cool aspect of this mod is one of the recipes that you have right from the start is this one, which is also completely unlike anything that's in the base game. Forage for cellulose fiber. And it just takes 2 seconds and just gives you some cellulose fiber. You can just, here, I'm just going to, the whole time we're going, I'm just going to keep making cellulose fiber. You can just do that at any point. This is, again, one of these things that makes this a mod you want to leave running when you go to work. Because you can make power out of this. You can, using your own little hands without moving, just standing here looking from side to side, you can make cellulose fiber and use that to make pellets and use that to make bricks. You can't make the bricks into charcoal in your hands, unfortunately, but you know, that's pretty good. You can produce, I can't remember the number, there's some number of megawatts of power that you can supply to your base just through digging in your pockets for cellulose fiber, which is cool. Anyway, that's the green stuff. The brown stuff to use for making lithia salt, and you need the lithia salt because the lithia salt lets you make thermal water, and you need the thermal water to make the red algae. You also need ammonia to make the red algae. How do you get ammonia? Well, you make blue algae from sulfuric wastewater and carbon dioxide. That's why we need the charcoal up there. And then the blue algae you can make into ammonia. So with the thing that you get from the brown algae and the thing that you get from the blue algae, you can then make the red algae, and that you do a third thing with. I've forgotten what you do that with. You do that to make alien fertilizer. That's what you do that with. Oh, this was a thing that made me stop playing this mod the first time, I think, was looking at alien fertilizer and just being like, I can't do this. I'm not going to do this. Looking in my planning tool here at what it would take to make some alien fertilizer and just being like, this is ridiculous. But you need alien fertilizer. The way that the sort of some of the ecology in this game works, which I feel like I can't even explain, man. There's 3 different categories of like biological stuff. There's fish, there's puffers, there's biters, there's plants, there's algae, there's trees, there's multiple kinds of trees and algae, there's huge numbers of different kind of plants, there's 3 different biomes for the plants to be from and grow different ones. Anyway, there's a point where to continue doing that and to continue doing the research that comes from that, that gets you access to more of that stuff, you need some alien fertilizer. You have to have it. And to make alien fertilizer, where does it actually come out of? Here. You need fertilizer. Cool, that's not that hard. You could make fertilizer, compost, and urea gas. Getting urea gas is a bit tricky, but not that hard. That part's easy. But you need alien goo. And to get alien goo, you need alien bacteria. And to get alien bacteria, you need alien spores. We're not even going to trace the other one. And to get alien spores, you need polluted artificial fish water. Naturally. So this is my fish tank section. Here are the fish tanks in my factory. I have 36 fish tanks using brown algae and some pulp. There's pulps as well as sludges and slurries, and some fish water to make dirty fish water. You can also take the fish that you make and chop them up and use the meat to make also more dirty fish water, which is grim. This isn't running at the moment. All of this is stationary because it's kind of done most of what it's going to do. It took a long fucking time to do it. Yeah, it's kind of weird that I spent so much time building this whole thing and it just is now going to sit here and not do anything for large parts of the game. May never do anything again, depending on, yeah, whatever. There's a tiny farm here growing a tiny amount of beans in order to get a tiny amount of nutrient pulp. Somewhere else in my base, there's a huge farm producing tons of beans because beans are a great source of power. As we all know, beans are very powerful. So what am I doing with this alien fertilizer? I'm using it to grow gardens and turn the gardens into these things, these green I don't know. I always see this as like a green burrito or something. I don't know what it's supposed to look like. Alien plant life samples. You need to use those to make gardens, but you get them back from the gardens. You put a garden in and some alien fertilizer and some alien samples, and you get out 2 gardens, and you can then turn those gardens back into samples and get slightly more than you put in. That's another one of these things that I looked at and was just like, I can't do this. And you can see, like, this was ridiculous. I overbuilt this hugely. This whole thing was really weird. The production times are so long for these recipes. This one takes 5 minutes to produce one item. This one takes 1 minute to run once. So just the starting from a small number of these things, which you need to feed in to get the whole thing started and to start producing more of them, it takes you so long for it to actually build up to the stage where you're producing a significant number of them, where you can tap into that, circulation and take some out without slowing it down. It's nuts. There's one thing that's like this in the base game. It's the way the sort of uranium enrichment works in the base game. But oh boy, is this ever so much slower and so much more agonizing. Here's a single tree growing situation here. I'm making rare trees. I've got to the point where I can produce from water and goo rare trees, which are just, that you use to make more trees. Oh my goodness. And yeah, I don't know, have I even really used that? Was that worth it? I'm now reflecting. I'm having a moment of clarity and be like, I guess I used it to get more of the bio research stuff, but I don't think I've actually used any of the bio research stuff because I already had the beans, and I think the beans are the only things that I've used this for. Where let's go to beans next. That's sort of the next thing that I built, I think. So I got to this point. I was pretty happy with this point, right? Like I was pretty happy with, I've got a good mall going. I've got a good factory to build things to make more factory going. It's slow, and it's still slow. It hasn't gotten any quicker really, but it will make me eventually a lot of things that I can then use to expand further. And I did manage to expand further. I didn't just burn out there, which is a kind of place where I might well burn out. Here is some bean power. I think this was the first bean power that I built. You start with water, obviously. You have this whole chain to make that water into a different kind of water, and then use that water to make sand. And with sand, you can grow beans, which is cool. You have to feed some beans back and to make bean seeds out of, but then the rest of the beans that you don't need to make bean seeds to keep growing beans, you can make into pulp. And you can make pulp into gasoline. Fuel oil. There is also petroleum somewhere else in the game, I guess. This game has such detailed chemistry. It is ridiculous. There's all these, different ways to make different chemicals out of different chemicals. And a lot of it is, it's obviously not like 1-to-1 accurate to life, but a lot of it is very much based on real chemical processes in ways that are cool, I guess. So yeah, bean power. This is like first bean power, and then later on I was like, I'm going to build big bean power to support this next level of base that I'm going to build, which hasn't really ended up being built in a meaningful way. So here's big bean power. Here's turning water into other kinds of water. Here's turning that water into sand. Here's all my beans, my bean farms. And then, well, I guess you get the bean plant and you turn that into beans, and you turn the beans into pulp, and you turn the pulp into fuel oil. And you burn it. And that gets you power. So this was like my biggest power plant. What can I make? I got up into the gigawatt range. Definitely have never gotten there on this mod before. So yeah, so then at this point, let's get my train. Where's my train? I need my ride. Here's another thing I've never done in C Block before. Trains. I was like, why would you use trains? Like this game, I've never gotten past like what sort of scale? Like not even this scale. I don't know. Never really gotten past like this sort of scale before, I would say, in my previous one. So I was always just like, it's hard enough, man. It's hard doing liquids. It's hard doing belts. It's hard doing these production chains. let's do something else. Where did my train go? It's going back to the other one because I didn't do this right. But yeah, once you get big enough and you're trying to just build big things, you eventually are just like, yeah, maybe trains make sense. And then what trains let you do is what I sort of tried to do, which is do city blocks. This is this design philosophy that has become sort of a popular way to do large-scale bases in Factorio, which is to modularize but on a large scale. So to make a grid out of rail pieces that are modular that you can fit together, and then within those grid squares make modular factories that you can feed with trains. And that makes it very easy because you have robots and you have blueprints, so you can copy and paste these. Once you've built one of these, if you want to expand your base more, you can build more of them very easily. You can copy and paste them and put them down. It'll take a while for your robots to build them. It might take a long time and a lot of power, but they'll do it. So that's sort of the popularity of it, and it's a pretty big scale. So here's what I started building. I wanted to scale up this process of getting geodes out of a certain kind of water. I wanted to scale up a lot. That's what all this is on my first city block that I built. Truly very large. This is turning viscous mud water into heavy mud water. That's just one of the muddy water to other muddy water transitions that are available. And then all of this, which is again not running at the moment, very little of my base is running at the moment. It has this like passive hum. It's kind of funny. The just like base level of it takes electricity to make the algae that you use to make the charcoal that you use to make the power, and so they're in it, so it never quite runs down. It's always sort of ticking over, even if you're not really producing anything, the base. Anyway, here I'm making so many geodes. I'm proud of this design. I figured out one of the tricky things that I've struggled with in this game before is when you're making all these different kinds of geodes, you need to sort all these out into their different colors, because you can't process them all in one place. You can only have one recipe per machine, so you need different machines to crush the different colors of geodes. And that's what this whole bit was me trying to be as clever and as space efficient as I could with getting the colors of the geodes, in a compact way, not having to have 6 different belts or 8 different belts or whatever for 6 different belts for 6 different colors, but being able to have them just on 3 and then merge those together and then split them apart and sort them and get all this done here and then turn that all into sludge. And that was the idea of what was going to be outputted here. Was I was initially like, it's just going to be this sludge, but then I was like, there's plenty of space here. I can do the filtering step as well. So here's a huge array of filtering that's taking my slurry and making it into sludge. And then there's sort of side things that you need to feed all of this. So like, in order to make sure all of that has what it needs, here's a little place that's making charcoal. This stuff is just to make oxygen. All of this is getting compressed air that I can split into hydrogen and oxygen just using electricity somehow. Nitrogen and oxygen, excuse me. Because you need oxygen for part of the process that turns sulfur into sulfuric acid. You need sulfuric acid to turn geodes into slurry. Well, the crystal dust that you get from the geodes into slurry. This is something from something later that I crammed in here. Don't look at that. Ignore that. That's not part of my nice, perfect, big city block build. But yeah, this whole thing is self-contained. Here I'm processing all the wastewater to reclaim the sulfur. I laid out this whole thing by hand. I mean, I don't know. I didn't lay it all out by hand, right? Once you design one row of this, you can sort of figure out how to repeat it. And that's how I've done a lot of it. But then I was like, I can copy this. And so I decided to, rather than move on and actually use the sludge that I'm making from this to do anything, I was like, let's build another one. So I built another one. I was just like, let's put another one on top. Here's the one where I am. Here's another one. And they sort of mirrored them and have them both feed this one train stop in the middle. Cool. And then I was like, let's build more. So I built the same. Copied that whole thing here on the other side. I'm over here in these 2 blocks. Here on the other side, I've built the same 2 blocks again. So I've got 4 lots of this block of making this goddamn mineral sludge that I need. And then, so these blocks I'm kind of happy with. I'm sure there are ways in which they don't work. I've learned some things about scaling up as I've gone. And in particular, I've learned that liquids don't scale the same way belts do. And that kind of pissed me off. I had sort of been a lot of the times going through this game feeling like, oh, like liquids are kind of easy. Like navigating liquids through parallel underground pipes is kind of second nature. And I in some ways find it easier than trying to get belts places because you can go underground for huge stretches. So it's easy to go underneath buildings and things like that. But yeah, once you start getting really long pipes, the throughput goes down a lot. And I sort of knew that happened, but I also underestimated how much that happens. I didn't even automate production of pumps in my initial base down here. Can I see where my little hacky egg? Yeah, here it is. Sort of a leech on the side of my robot factory. There's my robot factory, is my pump factory that I sort of crammed in here. I also had to change this when the recipes changed to the patch. Look at all these inserters. I'm grabbing aluminium from here to hand it all the way down there where this guy can pick it up and put it into the pump factory. But I think something that I definitely have learned overall, you know, for the 5th time I play C-Block or whatever, is you need more pumps, and you just need pumps everywhere. If you want to actually get large scale liquid throughput, you just need to have, you know, a pump between every underground segment. It's the only way to do it. Or to make smaller scale stuff. I kind of started to try and do that later, where rather than having to have something like this where I have big separated steps, try to have more integrated chains that you can then repeat a lot. So rather than doing all my water in one big block and then all my geodes here and then all my geode crushing and all my geode dust melting and then all my filtering and then all this, instead do like a little bit of each of those in one smaller unit and then repeat that smaller unit. That's better than doing each of those in a huge unit, because then you run into these liquid throughput problems. And I had that in a big way in the next thing that I built. What was I thinking? With this? I was thinking about acids. That's what I was thinking about. So I got a lot of slurry, got a lot of mineral sludge from those first 4 city blocks that I built. And I wanted to use that to make, you know, some large scale production of rocks, of ores. But to do the later steps of turning ores into fancier ores, you need acids. And sulfuric acid is easy to come by, but the other acids are hard to come by. So I wanted to try and make a way to get all of those acids. So this whole block that I'm in now is to make one of the things that you need to make acid, to make one of the acids. I guess you're trying to make sulfuric acid, which is easy, but also hydrochloric acid and fluoric acid and nitric acid. Those are the big 4 in my head. Those are the ones that you need. All of this here, all of this whole block is to make one thing that you need to put in to those production chains to make those acids. I'm turning a lot of water into lime over here, and that I'm using to filter air. I don't quite understand. Air scrubbing. I'm scrubbing the air. Maybe in the base game, this is a pollution regulating thing. I have or not in the base game, but in the non-C block version of this production mod, if that makes sense. Maybe this is for like reducing pollution, but it's not in this mode. In this mode, you use it because you want the dirty filters, because from the dirty filters, you can get acid gas. Acid. And that you can turn into things. But this build, more than any other build I look at now, you know, that I've had some of this actually running for a while, and I'm like, I think none of this is a good idea. If I was doing this again, I would not do anything like this on this scale where I'm trying to get liquids through at a scale like this, because it's just not going to work. There's no way all of this is going to run at the same time. Certainly not without way more pumps in way more places. So Yeah, but whatever. It did kind of work, right? It is what it is. It's there. And that goes across all of this acid gas. Comes across into my acid factory, and I put the acid into trains at the end. Here's the big four. Here's sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, nitric acid, hydrofluoric acid. That's all of that. And I have like, I also needed here, man, this is like a mini factory here. Here's like a tiny little microcosm of everything that I've had so far, because I needed a tiny amount of resources to do a certain step in this acid production. I was like, okay, I'm just going to make a tiny amount of stuff. So here's growing algae to make cellulose, to make pellets, to make bricks, to make charcoal, and you need the charcoal to filter the slurry that you're getting by getting the geodes out of the water and crushing the geodes and getting the dust. And so with the charcoal and the dust and some acid that you're getting from later, you can make some crystal seedlings, and you can turn that into these 4 ores, and you can turn those 4 ores into gold and aluminium. No, silver and aluminium. All of this here that my mouse is outlining there, that's all to make silver and aluminium ore. And I need silver and aluminium ore, because with those I can do this. I can take that acid gas. So look at the scale of this, right? I need all of this to make enough acid gas to feed into this recipe in this number of chemical factories, right? And then just this little bit here, this little tiny corner of spaghetti here, is enough to make the other input for this process, which is the green metal catalyst. So just like the ratios of like, you need, so much gas and such a tiny amount of this for this process. I think that's maybe part of why I overshot so much with how much I scaled this, because I maybe was scaling off this end of it rather than the bigger end of it. I don't know. Anyway, from this you get hydrogen fluoride gas, which is the only way you can make hydrofluoric acid. Maybe there's other ways later in the game, but this was the most difficult one, I feel like, out of all of them, because you need so much capital investment. You need to invest so many resources in the buildings you need to produce acid gas at a decent rate, and that's the only way, by cracking that you can get hydrogen fluoride gas that you can then turn into hydrofluoric acid. You also, as a side product of this, get sulfide gas, which you can then take away and make sulfuric acid from, which I do. And then the other two are way easier. You can use this and some other things. Ammonia. Where am I getting ammonia from? I must have some fucking algae somewhere. That's the thing I crammed in elsewhere. Oh my god. This was the one. This was the block. I made one pretty good block design, and then I mirrored it, and that was good. And then this block design I think is okay. Not great, but it's okay. And then this one couldn't do it in the end. I needed blue algae to make ammonia, to make nitric acid, because you needed to do whatever this is, nitrogen monoxide synthesis. It's the only way I could get nitrogen monoxide, which I needed for nitric acid. And so I needed blue algae to get ammonia, and the blue algae farms are like crammed in to the edges of the other thing. They're over here, they're down here. Are there some over here even? No, I didn't go that far. Not proud of that. Bad scaling on my part. What else is there on this block? Not much really. Here's where I'm getting, here's another problem area. All of this build is problem areas in terms of like the throughput of this isn't going to work. This is all making so much salt water. You can't do this early in the game, but you eventually get the ability to just use electricity and capital W water to make salt water. And I have like side product salt here because I might need salt later. In fact, I know I need salt later. Or not, is this? No, sodium hydroxide. That's not regular salt. Sodium chloride also features. Anyway, here's where I'm making hydrochloric acid. That one's relatively simple. So I finished this. I don't like the design anymore. I kind of, by the time I finished it, also didn't like it. Where's my train? Come get me, train. So I made the blocks to make lots of slurry. And I made the blocks to make lots of acid. And I didn't stop there. I made it one step further, which is down here. The other big expansion that I've done. I'm gonna walk down there. No, I'm not gonna walk down there. Let's go to Playertown South. So yeah, so I built all. Here's the starting zone, right? Here's everything that we looked at the start, and then here is not quite a city block of power, bean power. That's what all this is, and then here are these things that I was just showing you around. Here's a mirrored set of 2 slurry, and here's another, and here's my big acid thing in 2 shapes, in 2 squares. And all of that was going to come on trains and go past here. Here is my... At one point, you just are like, this amount of sand will not do. I just need more sand. I need so much sand. I can't have enough sand. So this is a whole thing that I made just to make sand. This is turning water into other water and eventually just getting rid of that water in order to get a lot of mud. And I can turn all of that mud into sand. You can get other colors of land, but for some reason I always stick with just the sand one that you start with. I don't want to use any of the other ones. And I copied and pasted that again over here because I just wasn't happy with how much sand I had. This was at the point when I was using robots to pave the earth with sand, and they need a lot. You can see a thing I did here. I started doing with my blocks, which I quite like. When I'm first building a block, I leave a strip of clear water around the outside of it. Most of these I've filled in now because I've sort of built out a lot of these blocks. But my idea here was that everything comes from the water in this game. So by doing this, you leave yourself open to the opportunity of being able to put in water pumps. These are the 2 kinds of pumps to get things out of the water, to get the various kinds of water that you need to make different waters, to make different things. So yeah, I like leaving that little strip open so that you can always put in pumps. And then once you put them down, I'm out of landfill, but you can take some landfill and sort of pave them over. Excuse me. And they keep working because you did it in that order, but you can't do it in the other order, obviously. So let's use all that sludge that we were making up in those previous blocks. So that all comes down here. And then this stuff, like, this kind of is going to work, I think. I don't know. Maybe the input won't work because it's liquid-based. But it would be easy to put more pumps in here. But I realized at this point, like, oh, belts are better. Like, belts scale infinitely. A belt that's 2 spaces long works exactly as well as a belt that's 200 spaces long. And that's great. So here I'm making the basic rocks. Raw crotinium ore. Here are the 6 colors of ore. I'm going to turn on the recipe mode here. Where is it? I never know which button it is. This is the button. Sort of lets you see the recipes on the map. It's kind of cool. So yeah, here are your 6 colors of basic ore. And I have to get rid of all this extra crushed rock. So I'm turning that crushed rock into a particular kind of water. And I know there are other places where I'm going to need this kind of water. So I don't want to get rid of all of it. But at the same time, I need to be able to get rid of all of it because maybe I'm using this part of the factory and I'm not using the part of the factory that's going to use this particular kind of water. So I need to have the facility both to be able to take water out of this system when it is produced if I do need it. But I also need to be able to get rid of it here if it's not needed elsewhere so that I'm not backing up the production chain that's making rubyite ore. So that makes all of this very complicated. I'm trying to take all of that into account. Maybe should not have taken that into account. Maybe should be more localized and not try and export multiple products from one block. But yeah, bit of a mess here. And then that's not enough because you can't just turn this into ores. You have to do a bunch of steps. Oh my goodness. You need some sub mods to go with this main mod, and one of the sub mods you need is one called Squeak Through. In the normal game of Factorio and in this mod without Squeak Through, adjacent buildings block you. I would not be able to walk here if I didn't have a mod called Squeak Through on. And yeah, just navigating these factories that you have to build in this mode with how space restricted you are. Just nuts. So here are some trains bringing that good sludge from up north in those previous blocks down here, and then we turn that all into these rocks and we crush those rocks, and then those crushed rocks need to go through 2 processes before I turn them into ore. This was where I sort of pitched myself at, was my previous base. I'm going through 1 extra intermediate process, just this one here, but then for this stage of the base I was going to do 1 more step, and that gives me access to more ores later on. And to do that I need no, I don't need all the acids for this. Oh man, I'm losing strength. This process of turning the crushed let's just take Jivalite. We'll follow Jivalite through. So we've got our raw Jivalite. We've crushed that. We get our crushed Jivalite and some purified water. That makes Jivalite chunks. Cool. Also makes a geode and some fluoric wastewater. So you've got to get rid of those, right? Those can't just hang around. You need to do something with them, or your whole thing are back up. What do you do with that? Well, all of this is what you do with that. There's another bit up here that I'm not going to show you. I'm turning the geodes into dust. Where am I crushing them? I don't even know. Oh no, I'm just melting them directly. I'm not even turning them to dust. So I'm melting the geodes and turning that into the thing that I'm going to all of this length to make. All of this is to make the same thing that I'm making here, obviously different quantities. And here I just have to chuck it away, right? I'm doing the same thing that I was talking about a moment ago with the certain kind of water. I'm trying to be able to say, okay, well maybe later I'll think of a way to be able to use this, valuable thing that I'm making here, but for now I'm just going to have to get rid of it with these clarifiers so it doesn't back up the other thing. Anyway, the other thing that you get out of that is that fluoric wastewater, and you can turn that into some fluorite ore, and fluorite ore you can turn into hydrofluoric acid. Wait a minute, wasn't that the thing that I needed so much shit to do up here? Well, yes, it is. But the next step of this process needs this acid. And to process the amount of Jivalite ore, or Jivalite chunks. So this step is making Jivalite chunks. The next step down here makes Jivalite chunks into Jivalite crystals. And to do that, it needs hydrofluoric acid. And the amount of hydrofluoric acid that you can take by processing the waste fluoric water from turning the crushed Jivalite into Jivalite chunks is not enough to turn that amount of Jivalite chunks into Jivalite crystals. This is another point at which I quit the game in a previous save, where I didn't really grasp that fact and thought that you could just keep adding steps to this chain and the outputs from one would be able to be worked in as inputs elsewhere and it would all be fine. Not so. But we did it anyway. We built all that stuff before and we did it anyway. And we take all that bullshit and we turn it into these. This isn't actually working at the moment. I don't think I got to the point of actually making the train stations to bring the acid that I'm producing down here, which is why it's all sitting up there. I'm filling up my inventory with this goddamn cellulose. Let's turn it into smaller things. There we go. Yeah, we're getting pretty much to the point where I stopped here pretty soon. My belt shit is getting out of control at this point. These huge blocks of parallel belts are something I try to avoid, but I'm doing it to get all these different colors of crystals. So I started here with my 6 different colors of basic rocks, and I split, and 3 of them went left and 3 of them went right, and they turned from rocks into chunks and from chunks into crystals, and now they're coming back into the middle, and in the middle I'm turning them into ore. Also slag. There's also slag at this point that I need to get rid of. I don't think I've built the bit that gets rid of the slag. The last thing that I built was the huge belt maze to sort all of these out. So there's 6 different colors of crystals, and each of them I can sort into slag and then 5 different ores. But you get different combinations of different ores in different ratios from different ones. They mostly produce 2 of one thing. Yeah, 3 of one thing and 1 of everything else. is what they all do, but also some slag. God damn it. So this whole belt maze, all this stuff that's sort of half filled now, I guess you can see it well with the last one, right? Like this big messy belt is coming out here, and one by one I'm picking things off and sorting them out, and then I'm combining that with all of the different ones that you get from different places. And here's where I stop. This is as far as I got. The next step, so to like, this is all scaled up versions of stuff that I've done in the smaller base with fewer steps in it. So sort of where I've gotten up to analogize from this base, right? Here's making geodes, filtering the geodes into sludge, turning the sludge into the rocks, going through the first step in turning the rocks into chunks, turning that into ores. This is where I got up to with my scaled up build. This step here, turning this kind of ore into this kind of ore, turning the sort of made up ores into the real ores. And so the next step that I would have to do down here would be the massively scaled up and more steps in the middle version of this here, turning the ore into ingots, metal ingots. And then also from there, turning the metal ingots into usable forms of metal, like coils or sheets or wire. I don't think I'm going to do it. I think this is probably it for me on this C block save. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's more likely that instead I will go into other logistics games. I've already been playing some trains, and yeah, you know, there's always other factory games, right? There's always Satisfactory. There's always Dyson Sphere Program. I feel like there's another one that I'm forgetting. I don't know. I'm always looking at new ones too. So yeah, that's my C block factory. I don't know if it's the biggest factory I've built ever in this game. I mean, in terms of number of entities, it might be, because it's so much more dense than anything else I've built, and I don't build far into the late game in vanilla Factorio mostly. There are some mods that have even more complexity than this in terms of the production chains and the number of inputs and outputs and products and byproducts and flims and flams and zigs and zags and loops. There are ones that are worse than this, but only a few. Only like a couple of sort of mainstream mods that are like more sadistic than this in terms of their complexity. But this one's up there. I've played a few of the sort of intermediate ones. I haven't liked those so much. So yeah, I think this is probably the biggest thing I've ever made in this game, or the most complex thing I've ever made in this game. And I've gotten to a point where I do think I enjoy this mod for this phase of it, I guess, quite a bit. Like, I like this base here. I like the sort of semi-organized, but then also highly chaotic nature of it. I liked finding small solutions for weird, tricky recipes that you only need a small amount of, more than I like just building a huge repeating thing of this. Like, coming up with the design for this sort of step can be kind of fun, and I guess that carried me sort of through building these, but it hasn't been enough for me to make me want to keep going. So yeah, that is Factorio C block.